I think the biggest misconception about hormonal birth control is that it was conceived solely out of interest for women's rights as a way for them to control their fertility, have sexual freedom, join the workforce. And those were definitely side effects of it. But that was not the original intent behind the development of the hormonal birth control pill. So there's a couple players involved here. We have Dr. Gregory Pincus, who was the lead scientist behind developing the pill. And he is actually referred to as the quote unquote mad scientist by his alma mater's newspaper, the Harvard Crimson. He actually lost his tenure because he was a professor there. He lost his tenure from Harvard after this very bizarre Franken-bunny experiment where he was experimenting with embryos and stuff. And he thought he was doing something great scientifically, and it was not received well. And they were like, okay, no more tenure for you, sir. And as far as contraception, he was purely in it for the science, not the social implications, because he was quoted as saying, I am against women having sexual freedom. And he hastened to add that he is also opposed to sexual freedom among men. So this was not something that he was going into being like, I want people to have sex without the implications of not that he wanted them to have freedom, he wanted them not to have babies. So that was the thing for him.
Do you think this was religiously motivated?
I didn't see a lot of any religious undertones when reading about him. It was really more about wanting to control the population, specifically populations that he thought needed to be controlled. So he's working on all of these fertility experiments on bunnies, blah, 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 weird stuff. This other guy, John C. Rock, who the Harvard Crimson calls the good doctor, and he's also another Harvard alum, later joined Pincus in his quest for a contraceptive pill. He was an OBGYN. He dedicated his life to understanding fertility and solving overpopulation. For him, though, there were some religious aspects to it. He was actually Catholic. When they teach fertility awareness in the church, they have to be very specific about the way that they are teaching it and the wordings that they're using, because I think couples that are going to be married in the church are meeting with their pastor or their leader or whoever before their marriage, and that is actually something that they discuss. So it's very intertwined with the faith. So for him, it was actually kind of a conflicting view to be wanting to create a contraceptive because of his Catholic faith. He eventually started several infertility clinics in Massachusetts, where he then began testing synthetic hormones on his low-income patients. So during that time, he had the goal of curbing population growth, especially among people he saw as inferior. And so this is where he was kind of reconciling his contraception work with Catholicism, with this rationalization of, people like to have babies, and this is particularly so among primitive peoples, is what he called them.
So this was based on race and probably socioeconomic status. From what I was reading, it also looked like they were targeting people in poverty. So we have these two guys, these two scientists, they're working together to develop the pill?
Yeah, so Dr. Pincus, he had been on this trajectory for a long time. He was working at Harvard. He eventually separated or went off to start his own clinic because he wanted to have more freedom in the way that he was experimenting. And somewhere along the way, John C. Rock then joined him. So they joined forces in order to create the birth control pill.
And it sounds like from the things that we know they said, their motivations were population control, specifically targeted towards certain races and socioeconomic population.
Yes. And around this time in the 40s and 50s, eugenics was a big topic of conversation. So that really was what was at play here with them, more than sexual freedom, because they're clearly against people having sexual freedom.
One, what does that mean?
So eugenics is controlling population growth, especially among certain racial or socioeconomic groups.
Okay.
Yeah, it gets a little bit hairy. And so then we also have this other figure, Margaret Sanger, who was a leader with Planned Parenthood, a key figure in helping them to fund their research and promoting the birth control pill. And her stance is like, it's a little bit hard to discern which side of things that she was on, because she came from a very large family. I think she came from a family of 11 children. So she was very aware of the health implications and the quality of life that comes with numerous pregnancies. So she did want to advocate for women in that respect in order for them to be able to control and plan their pregnancies. But she also played into the eugenics aspect of it because that was what was helping her propel the development of this pill. So it's a little bit unclear whether she truly believed in the eugenics or she was just using it to propel her platform.
Do you know if they ever considered or tried any experiments on men for contraception?
You know, from everything that I've read, they were targeting females, but, you know, around this time, like in the first half of the 20th century, they were also sterilizing people. And I would have to say that they were probably sterilizing men and women and, you know, these decided socioeconomic and racial groups. But the idea of a contraceptive pill was always targeted at women, at least during this time.
Hey everyone, it's Caitlin.
And Caroline.
If you've been feeling out of sync, whether it's low energy, stubborn weight gain, hormonal imbalance, or just not feeling your best, we've got something for you.
Enrollment for our spring reset is officially open. This 10-week expert-led program is designed to help you transform your health through our 3 pillars of success: accountability, consistency, and community.
Over 10 weeks, we'll cover everything from nutrition, movement, and sleep to detoxing and finding your purpose, so you can build lasting habits and feel your best from the inside out.
You won't be doing it alone. You'll have personalized support from us, your expert guidance, and an amazing group of like-minded women who are on the same journey with you. Our current group is experiencing amazing breakthroughs, from food freedom to improved energy and focus, and even regulated cycles.
The reset kicks off April 7th, so don't wait. Secure your spot now. We are offering $250 off the full price for the early bird special from now until March 17th.
Head to the link in our show notes to sign up. Let's do it together.
So hormonal birth control essentially was originally conceived as a tool for population control, not women's liberation. So let's get into like how their methods, the methods to the madness of the creation here. So Pincus was testing synthetic hormones on low-income women and even asylum patients in Massachusetts because Harvard had a long-standing arrangement with a nearby Worcester State Hospital. So through that connection, he was using the guise of learning about the pill's possible tranquilizing effect to launch a trial among these patients in this asylum, feeding them birth control prototypes, and then essentially just like cutting into their uteruses to understand the effect. So it was a pretty like not a great way to go about experimenting. This would not be allowed now. And that's also something that I was reading about because laws about informed consent and ethical drug testing had not been written into legislature. And I mean, even still, it's a little wishy-washy. So that was where he started in the States. And as they got closer to developing this pill, they kind of realized that they needed even more freedom in the way that they could test on people. So Puerto Rico, being not a state, but being a part of the United States, was somewhere where they could go and kind of have freedom with the way that they were testing on people. So they went to Puerto Rico and got this trial group together, and lo and behold, there were severe side effects such as blood clots and nausea, and up to 50% of the participants dropped out. And a big complaint among them was that they thought they were pregnant while they were taking the pill. It was confusing them. They weren't getting their period. That made them worried. They thought they were pregnant. So they were like, we don't want anything to do with this. So they dropped out.
Did these women know that it was an oral contraceptive, that it was what
Yes,
it was?
They knew what it was, but they did not like the way it worked because, it's so interesting to look back on this, because I think especially for our generation and maybe the generation before us that had access to hormonal contraceptives, our periods were not thought of as a vital sign. It's something that you're inconvenienced by.
Dreading.
But prior to that, it was a sign of health. This is a sign that I'm not pregnant. I know what's going on with my body. So they were really confused by the effects of the contraceptive pill. And because of that, the doctor decided to add the placebo pills in to trick women into thinking that they were actually getting their period. So there's a lot of deception.
And this is what we have today as the sugar pills. The last week of the pack where you have the withdrawal bleed, and it's still a fake period. It's still not a real period. It's still kind of tricking you into feeling like you have your period, but that's not what it is.
Exactly. I know a lot of people just skip the placebo pills and go straight to their next pack so that they don't even have to deal with it. You're on the pill, so you're costing yourself something. But by skipping the sugar pills, there's no real problem to it because that's how it was originally designed. So these women were also reporting some severe symptoms, like I mentioned, blood clots, nausea, and their experiences were written off as psychological. I actually have a quote somewhere. What did he say about this? These side effects are largely psychogenic. Most of them happen because women expect them. So basically, Pincus was saying that these are only happening because they're expecting them. They're basically creating them in their minds. It couldn't be from this pharmaceutical drug that I'm feeding to them. So by 1958, approved the pill, and this made it available to American women. And this was despite all of the side effects and issues. There was definitely a lot of issues that came up in relation to the pill. Reportedly, 3 participants died during trials, but they weren't able to directly link their death to the pill. So
they never investigated it. So they weren't able to directly link it, but they didn't investigate it.
Yeah. So in 1957, it came to market, but by 1970, we had the Nelson pill hearings because of concerns over dangers like blood clots, depression, and heart attacks, which led to mandatory inserts with warning. And even despite this, the use of hormonal contraceptives skyrocketed, and millions of women were put on the pill within just a few years.
So women were choosing to be on this pill despite all of the problems it was causing. Do you think that they knew about the issues? Why do you think that is?
I know when I got my first prescription for the pill, they didn't tell me about any of the side effects. So I can't imagine it was too much different for women then. And also, this was such a novel thing at that point. There were only barrier methods up until that point. So for women to have something that they could control themselves, and another thing that comes up a lot is that they could hide it from men. I think that was appealing. So they were willing to give it a go.
I wonder what kind of advertising there was around it. If I had to guess, they're probably very, women empowerment focused for that time. That's such an interesting background. I actually didn't know any of that prior to today and us talking about it. I had no idea about the origins of birth control, and I don't think many women do.
People that have an interest in the birth control pill probably don't want you to know about that stuff. And it's been very sanitized and rebranded as this thing for women's empowerment. And I think the fact that this came to market right before the 60s, when it was the summer of love and, hippie culture and things like that, I think that we just have this mental association with this idea of sexual freedom.
A lot of women now are realizing that there are true side effects to birth control, and they're becoming more aware of it thanks to things like social media and people talking more about it and sharing their stories. I talk to so many women who are usually afraid of going off of birth control because a lot of their stories are set up the same way. When they were 12 or 14 years old, they experienced something like acne, cramps, heavy bleeding, and they went to their doctor, and their doctor put them on birth control and never gave them a plan for getting off birth control or really shared with them the long-term effects. And so they've stayed on it. Now they're in their late 20s and realizing the implications, or they're having symptoms and they're terrified to go off of it because they're afraid of acne coming back, or of course, getting pregnant.
I've talked to women in their late 20s, early 30s that have been on birth control literally since like 12, 13, 14 years old. Their entire adult life, they've never had a true menstrual bleed. They've only had these withdrawal bleeds. And a lot of times the reason that they were put on it in the first place was maybe the acne, or because they were having heavy or irregular periods. But that is the time when your body is regulating your period. So there are so many natural interventions that you can use to ease those symptoms as your body gets regulated to its cycle. But instead, they're put on these pharmaceuticals that are just shutting things down. Oh, and they get to adult age where they want to start a family, and their fertility is all messed up because they've been on this pill, and probably their doctor was like, oh, you'll just come off the pill when you're ready to have a baby and you won't have a problem. But that's really not the case for most people.
What do you think the implications are for coming off of the birth control?
If they've been on the pill for years, decades even, we're then dealing with nutrient deficiencies, gut health issues that are all interrelated with your fertility. So even if you do ovulate right after you get off the pill and you happen to get pregnant and that's what you were hoping for, are your progesterone levels healthy enough to support a pregnancy? Probably not. So then we're dealing with miscarriage, with pregnancy loss. So it just kind of creates this whole cascade of issues when somebody is coming off of the pill unsupported.
When we get put on birth control in our teenage years, and those are our developing years, like you said, we really lose our relationship with that vital sign and with our cycle and what it means for knowing our bodies and knowing our health, and furthermore, syncing with our natural way of living. When you're on birth control, you're not ebbing and flowing throughout the month. I've had people come to me, how can I cycle sync? And they're on birth control. And I have to gently break the news to them that you can't cycle sync because you don't have a cycle. You're the same every day.
You can apply the ideas of cycle syncing to your life, but that doesn't mean that you are experiencing hormonal fluctuations throughout the month.
Have you ever found a healthy food you love only to discover it's actually loaded with toxic ingredients, greenwashed with pretty packaging and clever marketing?
Yes, it is so frustrating, and you are not alone. That's why we created Master the Market, your ultimate guide to shopping smarter, decoding tricky labels, and stocking your kitchen with truly nourishing foods.
This extensive ebook breaks it all down, from hidden additives to the best produce, proteins, and pantry staples. You can shop with confidence.
Say goodbye to grocery store overwhelm. Grab your copy of Master the Market today. Click the link in the show notes to get started.
Having high estrogen feels a lot different than having a healthy level of progesterone. It's not the same energetic level. And that's where the cycle syncing element comes in, where you're honoring your body's natural cycle. But, if you're not experiencing that, you have no idea. So I took the pill for just a couple months when I was 21. And pretty quickly, I was experiencing severe side effects, migraines, cramps that I had never felt before. But then I got an IUD a few years later, and it was supposed to be lower hormones. So I thought it was going to be better for my body, but it just zaps you of your essence. And this is something that I've talked with women about before. This is not a singular experience for me, but you lose your sense of self, your zest for life, your reason for being. You feel blah all the time because your nutrients are depleted. Your gut health is probably in the garbage. Your mental health is probably not great either. And chances are your sex drive is also gone. So the whole reason of being on birth control in the first place, you don't even want to have sex after a while because you have no libido. You just kind of feel like a zombie.
Women have caught on to the risks of the pill, which include blood clots, heart attacks, increased cancer risks, nutrient deficiencies. They experience gut microbiome disruption like acne that leads to PMS symptoms, depression, anxiety, mood swings. So now there's this narrative that IUDs are better.
But really, it's like 6 in one, half dozen the other. Like, it's not that much different unless you maybe go for the copper IUD, which comes with its own side effects and risks, and it doesn't work for everybody because it causes some people to have really heavy periods. So I've had the Skyla IUD, which is supposed to be like one of the lowest hormone IUDs, and I've also had the copper IUD. And I had the Skyla for the longest period of time. I got this slow slide into all of these symptoms, and I didn't correlate it to my birth control because I had it for 5 years and nothing was immediate. So it was just like, am I getting older? I'm just falling apart. I don't know what's wrong with me. It took me a long time to connect those dots. Then I let my doctor convince me to get a copper IUD after that. And at first it seemed fine, but there is something to be said about the copper toxicity and how it affects your mental health, because I was convinced when I had the copper IUD that I had PMDD. I was 2 different people during my cycles. I would be fine for the first half, then I would just be anxious, depressed, in despair, can't focus on anything for the second half of my cycle. And it took me a little bit of time even to make that connection. I finally got that taken out. You have a risk with any type of contraceptive medical device intervention.
My number one question I always ask women when they come to me with birth control questions is, do you know how the birth control you're using works? I've never had a woman say, yes, I know how it works. And I think that doctors really are doing their patients a disservice by not explaining to them what is happening in their body. I can explain most contraceptives to women in a simple way in 2 minutes that they can understand. And I know that doctors can do that too. And I really think that if we're going to offer this to women as a long-term solution, then they need to have a good grasp on how it works in their body. And of course, side effects and risks. That's the whole point of informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
And we just need to be doing a better job of that.
Yeah.
And women need to be doing a better job of looking into it, because we can't rely on other people to outsource our trust to and know that they're going to have our best interest in mind. We really do have to look some things up, do our own research.
Absolutely. I think discussing the mechanism of birth control is really important. Do you want to explain that?
Sure. How birth control works?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's so many different birth controls out there, but specifically if we're talking about the pill or the IUD, they both work similarly because they're both using hormones. So throughout the month of your cycle, your body goes through hormonal changes and you release a cascade of hormones from your brain all the way trickling down to your ovaries to stimulate the drop of an egg during ovulation. Mm-hmm. That requires certain triggers, certain hormones from your brain to your ovaries. And what the hormonal birth controls do is they release progestin to stop those hormones from being released, to stop your brain from telling your ovaries to release an egg. Your ovaries signaling to your brain, you already have enough of the hormones. So we're sending that signal to our brain that we don't need the hormones.
The issue with this is that we are blocking ovulation, and ovulation actually is the main event of your cycle. Once you ovulate, then progesterone is released, and that is the only way that we can make biological, natural progesterone in our bodies. And this is not just the feel-good hormone that helps you prevent PMS before your period or that helps you sustain a pregnancy. It's also so important for our brain function, for our bone density, for our immunity. Many things in our body depend on progesterone production. So you can imagine for somebody that is on hormonal contraceptives for years or decades, I mean, aside from the nutrient deficiencies that contribute to poor mental health, we're also preventing progesterone from helping our brain function and our bone density. That's why osteoporosis is such a big issue among aging women.
Say there's women who have questions. They're listening to this. They hear us. They're like, okay, I need to ask more questions. Or all right, I'm ready to come off of birth control, but I'm so scared of getting pregnant, or I'm so scared of having a negative reaction. Let's start with the pregnancy one, though. What can a woman do to prevent getting pregnant without using contraceptives?
Well, we have a couple options here. We can block the sperm's access to the eggs, and this is real simple. These are our barrier methods. We've got condoms, diaphragms, sponges, cervical caps, very easily accessible tools with perfect use that is going to help you prevent pregnancy. Once you transition off of hormonal birth control, and I would recommend that you find a resource before you stop taking your birth control, before you get your IUD removed. Do some work to get your blood work done, address your nutrient deficiencies, figure those things out before you come off of your contraceptive, because that's going to make the transition so much smoother. It's going to help prevent acne breakouts. It's going to help prevent a return to really heavy periods if that's something that you dealt with. So you want to ease that transition and then have a plan of action to learn a fertility awareness method. There are lots of different ways that you can apply natural cycles. I would not recommend just relying on an app, especially if you've been on a contraceptive for a long period of time. It can take anywhere from 3 to 9 months for your cycles to regulate, and ovulation is not going to happen on the same day every cycle. So you have to be very active in your pursuit of natural contraception. So with fertility awareness methods, you are tracking things like cervical mucus, luteinizing hormone, basal body temperature. There are lots of ways for you to monitor your hormonal fluctuations and understand when you are at risk of becoming pregnant, if that's something that you're trying to prevent. And really, for most people, that's a 5 to 7 day window. 5 to 7 days that's possible for you to become pregnant, and the rest of the time is a pretty safe zone. But you have to educate yourself and equip yourself with that body literacy.
Yeah, and you can stack these two. Do the fertility awareness method when your signs are showing that you're ovulating. Use a condom.
Exactly. Yes. Back yourself up. The other part of this is to educate your partner. If they're not on board with you, it's going to be really difficult for you to effectively use a fertility awareness method. But the more educated that they are, the better your outcomes are going to be. And, the way that I learned to teach fertility awareness method, it's a 3-month program. And in that 3rd month, your partner joins you and he learns what's going on biologically with your body so that he can understand why it's important for you to either avoid intercourse during your fertile window or to use a barrier method. And, they say perfect use of fertility awareness method is avoiding or abstaining from intercourse during that time. But like you said, use a barrier method. Do what works for you. You learn these rules and then you apply it to your life. You figure it out for you.
What do you think are some of the most common experiences people do have on birth control, but they don't even relate it to their birth control pill because either it's so common, everyone they know experiences it, or they've just been on it for so long, it's their normal?
I would say probably the mental health things like anxiety and depression are huge. I had no idea the correlation between those issues that I was experiencing and my birth control. And then the gut health issues, that the gut health impacts your mental health. It impacts your skin if you're experiencing acne. It impacts your immunity if you're getting sick. It can impact, if you go so far to where you have like leaky gut, then you're having these food sensitivities and trouble digesting and just like this whole like cascade of digestive issues. So there's definitely a correlation between these two things. I challenge anybody that's on hormonal birth control to go get their blood work drawn and see, where are your levels of magnesium, B6, zinc, selenium, folate, omegas. That's a huge one. Mine were in the tank. You got to do your due diligence and you have to find a provider that is going to work with you and not roll their eyes at you.
It's crazy to think of how many women are just experiencing anxiety on a daily basis or food sensitivities, gut health issues, and just think it's their normal, but it's actually related to this pill that they've been on for 10 years.
There are other things that you'll probably have to work on and address to fully heal from that. But personally, I can say that I don't even identify with that anxious version of myself. I can hardly remember being that person anymore. And I knew I really did not want to be on antidepressants in my 20s. Like I knew, though, that if I went to a professional and told them how depressed I was, what my thought patterns were, I knew that they would put me on an antidepressant.
So syncing with your cycle, being off of hormonal birth control, naturally tracking your cycle, understanding your body has brought me a lot of freedom. I know that it's brought you a lot of freedom, just understanding your body, how to work with your natural cycles, shedding the stigma around hormonal fluctuations and really getting into your femininity and that ebb and flow, giving yourself permission to be a woman and not need to have that ambitious, aggressive drive and perform the same every day. You and I both give ourselves so much grace. If we're tired one day, we know how to work with our bodies in that way. We know how to feed ourselves for our specific cycles, and it just makes life feel more like you're flowing like water and less like you're pushing against a wall constantly.
That was a huge frustration of mine before I understood this. Why one week am I just on a roll and I'm getting things done, and then the next week hit a wall and you just can't do it, physically you don't have the energy. So once I learned about these hormonal fluctuations and what a natural menstrual cycle actually looked like, it was light bulb, I'm not a man. My body is not built to operate like a man. I need to integrate these ideas into my life, and that is going to give me more ease. And it was so freeing to come to that realization.
It's freeing, and it creates so much self-compassion that you didn't have before when you're constantly beating yourself up. Why can't I work out hard enough? Why am I eating more today? Why am I experiencing all this anxiety or these mood swings? And then when you know how your body operates, you just see it with grace and compassion and understand why it's happening.
It also gave me food freedom, because that was something that I really fixated on for a long time, and realizing that my body had these specific needs and that they fluctuated throughout the month really let me ease up on that fixation mentally and develop a healthier relationship with food, which I had no idea even how much mental space that was taking up for me, and how much better it felt to be able to focus my energy in other areas that I really cared about.
I did have that struggle with work and self-worth, and I just need to be productive constantly. That guilt of not constantly being productive was so prevalent that I could never relax. And I had to learn how to relax in order to lean into that ebb and flow and that femininity a little bit. Exercising and moving your body, that was something I used to just push myself all the time and beat myself up for if I couldn't compete at the same level I was the week before. So it really brings into focus a lot of what we're struggling with in life and creates clarity around it through that lens of self-compassion, and brings us to a place of freedom. And
aside from the implications of these hormonal contraceptives, we also have like these social stigmas around being a woman and having a cycle. Like, oh, is it that time of the month? Like those kind of like comments that was something even if I was moody, my dad would say to me, and I would get the, that triggers even more, makes me even more angry, whatever it was about. And I think that is a huge reason that I got into this work too, was to help us to remove those narratives around our cycles and really embrace them in a positive way, because it really is like a superpower to have this fluctuating energy and like mental focus and just all of this throughout the month. And when you know how to utilize it properly, you really can be unstoppable.
Hey there, it's Caitlin, the creator of Cyclical Pilates, and I have something really special to share.
And I'm Caroline, yoga instructor and wellness enthusiast. I'm so excited to be joining Caitlin in the stunning Mayan Riviera this October for an unforgettable Pilates and yoga retreat.
That is right. From October 20th to 26th, 2025, we're inviting you to unplug from daily stress and reconnect with your body through cyclical Pilates, strength training, yoga, and restorative flows, all by the turquoise waters of the Caribbean.
And it's all happening at Copal Retreats, a gorgeous beachfront oasis where you'll enjoy luxurious accommodations, nourishing meals, a sound bowl ceremony, a 1-hour massage, cultural excursions, and plenty of times to relax and explore.
This retreat is all about movement, connection, and balance. With just the right mix of adventure and restoration, and with everything taken care of, all you have to do is show up.
Spots are limited, so if this sounds like the reset you need, head to the link in our show notes to reserve your place.
We can't wait to move, breathe, and unwind with you in paradise. See you in the Mayan Riviera.